So, a few important announcements before we start. As you guys probably have already seen, hopefully have already seen, Homework 0 has our setup, and you should check that out either today or tomorrow, because by Thursday we're going to need to have MongoDB set up for our workshop on Thursday. Also, if you're on Zoom, our Panopto live stream is hopefully working now. If you go to weblab.mit/livestream, you should be able to go to Panopto, where you can easily toggle, like you have multiple screens between the video, which will have the whole lecture hall, and the different slides, whatever, all the computers that we have plugged in. So if that's easier for you, feel free to use that, but of course we'll still always have the Zoom room. No office hours today, but milestone 0, where you form your team, lock it on the portal, and submit a Google form with 10 ideas for your website, is due on the end of day on Wednesday. And reminder that you need to complete all of the milestones in order to get credit for the class. You can be a team by yourself, that's fine, but you just need to submit your milestones. And if you still need a team, even after our mixer yesterday, feel free to check out, there's a place on Piazza where you can post about it. And then finally, recordings for day 1 are up on YouTube, I think. Sanvid, are the recordings from day 1 up on YouTube? OK, Sanvid is working on getting the recordings from yesterday up on YouTube. And we will try and get quicker in our turnaround time to get all of the recordings up on YouTube. So hopefully the day of, or worst case day after, we'll have all of the videos up. But of course, you can always access the slides on the schedule page on our website, the schedule tab, or on our Google Calendar if you add it to your GCal. That's probably one of the easiest ways to get access to all of the slides and videos as soon as they're up. All right, welcome everyone. Everyone looks a little bit sleepy, so hopefully coding will wake you up, question mark. Anyway, so the topic of today is we're doing a little bit more JavaScript. Yesterday we just blazed through a ton of syntax for all the basic JavaScript stuff that you might need to know, but today we're actually going to be talking about some things that are going to be very important for what we're doing in React. We're going to be talking about callback functions and arrays. You are going to see this pretty soon later today as we start talking about React in our lectures. So let's dive in. So yesterday we talked about how you can define a function in JavaScript. We had this example of a function that takes the temperature in Celsius and converts it to Fahrenheit. And we noted that a function is just an input, and then you feed it into the body of a function, and it produces some kind of output. And so the input is in the parentheses, the arrow represents feeding it in, and then the output is the body of the function, which is wrapped in curly braces. So this is what a function represents, and it's stored in memory, kind of like that gray little box. But then if we want to give that function a name so we can call it, so we can do things with it, we need to create a variable and set it equal to that function. And so this is the syntax to do that. We saw this yesterday, where we have the variable, we're setting the variable const Celsius to Fahrenheit equal to just that exact same function. And the highlighted part is the same as the function definition at the top of the slide. Any questions on this before I move on? Cool, this was all just review from yesterday. And another thing we're going to review from yesterday, because you'll need it in a sec, is push and pop for arrays. If you have an array, you can pop off the end or push a new element to the end of the array. So given these things, and if you need the slides to reference the syntax, feel free to pull it up. It's linked on the schedule page of our website. Oh, the other thing we needed to review is looping through an array. So this is the syntax for it. It's basically just creating a variable I that will keep track of the index of our array, and then we increment that every single time we go through the loop, and we stop when I is equal to, because that's a strictly less than, pets.length. So we go through every single element of our array. OK, so what I'm going to ask you guys to do is write a function that takes in not just one temperature, but a whole array of temperatures, and outputs another array that has all of those temperatures, but converted to Fahrenheit. And you should not be mutating or changing the array that is passed into the function. You should be creating a new one and returning that new array. And so you can, the ways that you could do this are you could honestly write your code directly in the browser console if you wanted, or you could just open up your VS Code, create a new empty file with, that ends in .js, write your code there, and then just paste it into your browser console and run it if you want to test it. So I'll give you guys like 4 minutes to attempt that. Again, these slides are linked on the schedule if you need to reference the syntax from the previous slides. As always, add yourself to the queue if you get confused, or just flag me down. Zoom people, have you guys been able to hear me okay? Yes, okay, thank you. Give me on a show of fingers, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. How many more minutes do you think you need? Okay, cool. I will give you guys 2 more minutes. Walk in circles around the lecture hall because I have nothing else to do, so flag me down if you get confused about anything. All right, for the sake of time, I'm going to pull everyone back together and start coding this up. But If you did not finish, no worries, you can just follow along with me. So I'm just going to go to my VS Code and create, I'll just put this on the side. And I'll create a new empty JavaScript file. And I'm going to define my function. Let's give it a name. Actually, no, I won't give it a name right now. So we'll take in an array of temperatures in Celsius, and then we're going to do something with it. So first we want to iterate through our array of temperatures in Celsius, and how we do that is we use a for loop. So we'll say let I equals 0, I is less than array Celsius.length, and increment I every time we go through the loop. And so now we're going to do something with array Celsius at index I. But what are we going to do with that? Well, we want to convert it to Fahrenheit and then add it to a new array that we're going to build. So we'll say temp F, that's a singular temperature, is going to be, what is the formula? The temperature in Celsius, which is the element of the array Celsius at that index, times 9/5 plus 32. And then we want to add this temp F to some kind of array. And in order to do that, we can just create a new array, an empty array, that we'll just call array F. And then every time we go through the loop, we'll just do array f.push temp F. I think that syntax is right. If it's wrong, someone can raise their hand and correct me. And so we go through. Why don't you need to let in front of array F? I do, actually. Actually, I'll call it const, because we're not going to change the place in memory where array F points to, so we'll just use const. Thank you for the correction. And so now, once we're done constructing our array F, we are going to return it. And I will now give this function a name. I'll say const array Celsius to Fahrenheit equals that. And then let's paste this into our browser console and see if it works. So we can go something like that. And then that will define the function. And then we'll say temps C equals, I don't know, let's do like 20 degrees, 22 around room temperature, 0, 100, or something like that. And say temps F equals, and then we'll pass in this array into our function. And we get around room temperature, around freezing, around boiling. Amazing. So I'll leave this code up for a second. Does anyone have any questions on the code that we just wrote? All right, let's move on then. OK, and this is where the formula comes in. So now let's say that we want to add some more. I have some more operations I want to do on my temperatures. Let's say I want to also convert an array of Fahrenheit temperatures to Celsius. Or maybe I'm scientific and I want to convert my array of Celsius temperatures to Kelvin. How would we do that? Well, you could just take this code and copy and paste it 3 times and just change a little bit. But if you copy and paste this code 3 times, notice that the only part that we're changing is that part that I highlighted in orange. The rest of the code will be exactly the same. So ideally, we would want to have some way where we can reuse that 90% of the code, everything except the part highlighted in orange. Turn and talk to someone near you how you think you might do that. OK, I'm going to pull us back together. I'm not sure if many people knew the answer because it's kind of tricky. So OK if you didn't. But we use callback functions. So how are we going to use a callback function? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to write a function that is the general version of what we just saw. And so what I want you to do is write a function that's called modifyArray, and it'll take in two inputs. It'll take in an array, but it'll also take in a callback function. And then it will return a new array, the result of applying the callback function to every element of our original array. So what the heck does that mean? That was a lot of words. If I have my modifyArray function, and it takes in my array and this callback function called transformFunc, then it will apply this function to all the elements of the array. So if I have call modifyArray on this array of cats, and I pass in a function that is called hatify, that will take in a cat as input and output a cat with a hat, then what my modifyArray function will do is it will call hatify on every single one of my cats and spit out this array at the bottom of the slide, which has all of my cats but now hatified. So now I'm going to ask you guys to code this function, this modifyArray function. Mostly focus on step 1, but if you have extra time, you are free to use your modifyArray function and play around with it. And on the bottom right of the slide, that's the syntax reference for the array Celsius to Fahrenheit function that I just wrote earlier. So I will give you guys a few minutes to attempt this, and then talk to someone next to you if you get stuck. All right. Hopefully that was enough time. If not, no worries. The main point of having you guys code these things is just to get you thinking about them. So if you were thinking about it, then that's what we want. All right. So basically, to make this general modifyArray function, all we need to do is take this, and we'll rename it. Oh, I have it on the slides. I'll just do that. It is easier than coding it. So all of the changes that I made were just adding in another parameter for the transform function. And then instead of doing this very specific calculation to convert from Celsius to Fahrenheit, now I just apply the transform function to whatever element of the array that I'm looking at. So this is the things that I've changed. And then if I were to actually call this modifyArray function, then I would define a function that takes in one temperature in Celsius and outputs one temperature in Fahrenheit. That's the C to F function there. And then I call modifyArray with my C to F function. Any questions on this code? All right. Just as a side note, one thing that we can do is write functions in a slightly shorthand notation. In the bottom half, in the bottom section of the code, that's more similar to the functions that we've been writing so far. But we can also, if there's the only thing in our function is just a single return statement, then we can shorten it by just having the input in parentheses, the arrow, and then the output in parentheses. So it's very much like input feeds into output kind of notation. And this is just the more general way of thinking about this, of the two different notations that we can use to write functions in JavaScript. OK, well, it turns out that there's a function that is modifyArray, because some very smart JavaScript people recognize that this is a thing that we might have to do all the time. And so the map function is almost exactly the same as the modifyArray function that we just wrote. But the only difference is that you need to take the array and do the array, the name of the variable that holds your array, and then dot map, instead of having that array as a parameter to your map function. I'll give you a sec to look at this code, make sure you understand what map does. OK. Since we are pretty short on time, I'm actually not going to do this map practice. But the basic idea is that we have rectangles, which is an array of JavaScript objects. And then we want to use map to create an array that contains the areas of those rectangles. So why don't I ask you to just turn to someone next to you and just talk out verbally how you would implement this, because we don't have much time to code it. All right, I'll pull us back together and show the solution. Nope, there's no solution. OK, that works. All right, I'm going to just put the solution on a slide after this, and you guys can look at it and try this practice afterwards if you have time as an extra little homework thing, because I need to make sure that the next group has enough time to do their lecture. So the next concept we're introducing is filter. It's very similar to map, but it just does a different thing. So if we have an array, then we can do filter, and then that filter takes in a function. But this function takes in a single element of the array and outputs a Boolean, true or false. And so basically we feed, so in this example, we have this array of numbers, positive and negative, in the values array. And then we have a function that takes in a single number and outputs true if x is positive, or that particular element of the array is positive, and false if that is 0 or negative. And so then what filter will do is it'll go through every element of the array, feed it into our function, and if that function outputs true, it'll keep that element. If the function outputs false, it won't keep that element. And then, for example, on the bottom code section of the slide, we have our staff names. And let's say I just really don't like Annabelle. And so I want to filter out. I want this function to return false only if the staff name is Annabelle. And so that way I can have a new array that contains everyone except Annabelle in it. Sad. OK, this is also going to be extra practice for after. You can view these slides and try it out yourself. So question, why, in a very general sense, why do we use callback functions? Well, one is for reusability. For map and filter, we don't want to have to rewrite the code to iterate through the array, pass the elements through this function every single time. And so we use callback functions. But another reason we use callback functions is abstraction. What does that mean? It means sometimes I want to write code that says, when this happens, do something else, do this. And what callback functions allow us to do is write the code for the do this, write the code for what I should be doing, and let other smart people, also known as the writers of the JavaScript libraries, write the code for when X happens. So for example, let's say we have a function called update animation, and we want to call that every 10 milliseconds. Maybe we're making a game or something, and we need to update the display. And we know how how we want to update the display according to the game we're making. And so we have this function, update animation, that we wrote. However, we don't want to write code to manage timers, interfacing with the computer clock or something with the browser, or I don't know. It's just a lot of low-level code that is kind of complicated, and we don't want to write it ourselves. So the JavaScript authors did it for us. And so they wrote this JavaScript library function called setInterval. And that interval will call whatever callback function is passed into it, which in this case is our update animation, every 10 milliseconds. And so we wrote the code for update animation. The JavaScript authors wrote the code for setInterval that allows this function to be called every 10 milliseconds. And we're happy, because all we had to worry about was updating our animation. OK, so next up, I'm just going to flash up a few slides. You probably won't recognize any of this code. You probably won't fully understand what it means, but I'm just going to show you. And we'll see this later in WebLab. And so I want you to just mark this down in your head and remember, oh, this is a callback function. And so when you see it later in WebLab, you can note, oh, that's a callback function, and think about it in terms of callback functions. So this is one example where we want to get something from a database. And then once we receive that thing, that's what the .then means. Once we receive the thing back from the database, then do this. And so the reason we use a callback function is because we don't know how to write the code that detects whether the thing has been received from the database. But we do know what we want to do once we get that information back. We want to send it, in this case, we're sending it back to the front end. And then similarly to this, in our backend code, you're going to see code like this that says, when we receive an HTTP request to this particular endpoint, we want to do this, do something. And so, all right, my clicker isn't working now. But basically, we don't want to write the code that detects whether we've received an HTTP request or not. That's some kind of weird low-level stuff with ports and everything. But we know that as soon as we get an HTTP request that follows this particular form, we want to do some stuff with it. And so in general, whenever you see this syntax for callback functions, with the parentheses and the input and the arrow being passed as a parameter into another function, I want you to think, like, what is the when this happens and what is the do this? Like, why are we using a callback function here? And if you can think about it in those terms, that will serve you well for the rest of WebLab. And this is just highlighting the particular, the area that is itself the callback function. OK, I think that was the end of my slides. So thank you all for bearing with me, and take a couple-minute break as we transition into our Intro to React lecture.